and helping them to, that's what I did at Seesaw Studio. I helped them to go through that pipeline from being a high school student and trying to figure out how to make a living through art and actually getting into art school and successfully graduating and, you know, just exploring a different creative career for themselves. And I'm really proud of the kids, and I know a lot of them today. A lot of them are in their early 20s now, and I'm seeing them grow. One of them actually is my apprentice now, and she wants to be a me. And I can't begin to tell you how I had to not cry in front of her when she told me that, because we need more Black and brown leaders in our community in the arts.
Yeah, we definitely need more leaders like you. I would definitely agree with your student that we need more folks that are able to have those kind of roles that you've had in the past and currently even still have even now. Now, you talked about public art and its role in social justice and even in the political fight. And I know that we've had incidences here where some public art has been torn down because folks did not like the image that it was creating and things of that nature. And also there are people that want to replace it. And then we have public art that in the past has dealt with graffiti, and some folks have had upset natures about that. And I know that I talked to a friend of mine earlier today, and they were talking about they would like to hear some of your reflections on both what was going on with the public art and the monument controversy, as well as graffiti, and whether that's actually a true form of public art and whether it's something that should be preserved.
Well, I guess we got to go to that statue, huh? We got to go to talk about that. I think it starts there. So, you know, for some of your listeners who aren't familiar with the history, I think a lot of people have heard about what happened here in Durham with the Confederate statue. But the statue itself is called For the Boys in Gray. And it was actually put up there in the way after the Civil War, way after. And it was funded by government money in part. But what people don't know is that a lot of the 700 Confederate sculptures in the U.S. were largely funded by efforts by white women groups that wanted to honor those Confederate soldiers. Well, the crazy part about that is that there are 31 states that have Confederate soldier monuments, and there were only 11 states that were actually Confederate in the Civil War. And they were put up right in parallel line to the Jim Crow era from the 1890s to the 1960s. So obviously, you know, I think about your earlier guest and talking about, you know, the rearing of children also includes public art because these are the images that they see every day. I was at that rally when the KKK decided they were going to come and protest, which they never made it. And there was a woman there who had a walker who was on the side and was an elder. And she basically told a friend of mine that she heard about this and was going to come out because she needed to see it for herself after all of these years. And she was in her 70s or 80s. So I can't begin to think about how many of our young men and women had to walk through as children and see these images and know what they didn't understand it completely. They knew how their parents were reacting to it. How many of our people have walked through that old courthouse and many courthouses having to pass a statue that basically told them in the beginning, before they even crossed the threshold, that they weren't going to get a fair chance. So, you know, what I say is, let's talk about replacing these statues, sure, but for me, I think the municipalities can and the states can actually work hard to create more public works of art that send a different message. So then that way, should our politics take a turn, there will be too many public art projects out there in the community that will basically, you know, outgrow any other message that might want to be sent.
Yeah. And what do you say to those folks that are looking around and they see, I mentioned it earlier, but they see people that are trying to do graffiti, whether it's on the train, whether it's on a wall, and they feel that that is not a true form of public art. I know that a lot of times, particularly you being from New York, that was actually a very common form of public art. So I was just wondering what some of your views were of quote-unquote graffiti art and part of that hip-hop culture.
Yeah, so, you know, That's really interesting because graffiti art has actually always been kind of politicized. Oh, not just here, but all around the world. I mean, the best example of graffiti art that is basically that we can basically talk about is actually the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall now is nothing but an example of graffiti art that was spray painted and scrawled over and over again during the occupation by the Russians. And I can tell you that growing up in the Bronx, I actually used to tag trains, and my tag name was Strawberry. And I used to teach my students about graffiti and the history of it. And graffiti here in the U.S. actually has also existed throughout time in different forms. But I guess it became part of popular culture, during the 70s and 80s. And it's, a lot of the Bronx history, I can tell you that the Bronx was, as they say, burnt. It looked like Beirut in the 80s, and 70s and 80s, and anybody who lived there or near there will tell you the same. And a lot of the buildings were burnt out for many different reasons, which I won't get into here, but those were the images. And so you grow up with that, and then you start to think, well, there's ways. How can I make it more beautiful? How can I change what this looks like? And I think that's what the young people at the time were trying to do, is they were just trying to create something beautiful in a world of desolation and blight. So for me, graffiti now is like hip-hop. We started out hip-hop with, we couldn't afford instruments, right? That's how the story legend goes. We couldn't afford instruments, so we took the, phonograph and we stuck a record on it and we started scratching. Well, it's the same thing with graffiti. Couldn't afford no dang art lessons. So we just started creating our own canvases, and I think that's what the birth of graffiti comes from, and we should still embrace.
What do you think about those early movies, like I guess in the 80s and maybe the 90s, that kind of like tried to put a face to graffiti? I'm thinking about like those movies like Beat Street and those early movies of that kind of era.
Wild Style and stuff. Yeah. And again, that's when graffiti became a part of pop culture. And I think it definitely commercialized what was trying to be done back then. But I believe that every pop culture phase and idea actually winds up becoming part of popular culture and part of the corporate culture. If we let it. Otherwise, the only way that it can is if it disappears. And if we look historically with art, that is the case. But, a lot of great artists came out of that time. The movies may have been about, but a lot of great musical artists came out of that time, but also a lot of great visual artists. I mean, Jean-Michel Basquiat came out of that time. And, hey, he currently has, one of, if not because I don't know the latest figures, but the most expensive sale of a painting in recorded history. I mean, that came out of the 1980s in New York City graffiti bomb new pop art movement. So I say, hey, every great idea, culture, trend can come into something that we look at later or embrace later and say, well, thank God for that, because I can tell you, hip-hop and graffiti saved me when I was a kid from a lot of other things that were going on around. And I think that's the case for a lot of others.
Yeah, and Dean could actually relate to that, because Dean is actually a member of the sales crew for Ninth Wonders, a record label, Jamla, and he's actually been involved. How long have you been involved with them now, Dean?
5 years.
Yeah,
5
and
a half years, something like that.
So he's been involved in trying to get word out about Rhapsody and the rest of the Ninth Wonder crew. And I know that you actually know some of those rappers, including some that have come in this area now and some that are still in this area. Because I know that you have had some history both with New York hip-hop artists as well as hip-hop artists that now call this area home. So I was wondering, did you get a chance at all to go by the beats and I'm trying to remember the full name of the rap festival that was this past weekend?
I didn't get a chance to. Did Dean?
No, Dean's actually up in New Jersey.
I'm in New Jersey.
Okay, all right. No, I didn't. What I love about the whole feel of it too. I mean, a lot of Kehinde Wiley. I mean, if you look at his work, definitely influenced by hip hop. He's taking traditional, I mean, traditionally white images, and then turning them on their head and creating religious iconic figures with nature. And then it's, a brother from around the corner who is, gilded and iconized into something greater than what our general society looks upon us. And I love how hip-hop is influencing everything. The beats and bars are in everything, Mark.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I mean, you can even see, just like, I'm a blues fan and I see the influences of blues on all kinds of music, you can definitely see the influences of hip-hop on all forms of entertainment as well. As a matter of fact, I was just looking in the paper earlier today and saw that there's a local distillery, and they actually used one of our local hip-hop artists to do some product placement in order to make their already successful distillery even more successful. So I was actually trying to see if I can find that article, but they're actually here in the Durham area, and have actually recognized one of our local talents as a way to highlight even more of their music. It says, it was actually in today's News and Observer, Durham-made vodka featured in Derillo video. So Jason Derillo, who's a R&B singer, and he's got a song called If I'm Lucky, which dropped Friday, but he's actually doing some product placement for Great Beard Distillery's Bedlam Vodka, which is a locally based vodka right here in Durham. So that's just one example of some of our artists, whether they be R&B or hip-hop, kind of using their skill sets to help another business as well.
Indeed. And, I wish that as much as I love hip-hop, and I truly do, I wish that so many more people knew about the other rock stars of art that are out there, the sculptors, the visual artists, as much as they know the latest hip-hop star, because they are a part of our history, and they're actually around us if we just look for it. Augustus Savage, John Biggers, of course, I've mentioned Kehinde Wiley. You go to Atlanta, Los Angeles, New York, of course, that we've been talking about. And you can see multicultural art in the public forum. But when you go to the smaller towns, the smaller cities, then it becomes more difficult. But yet, black and brown people are there. Asian folks are there. And I think that, imagine if hip-hop created all of this, all right, multi-billion-dollar industry. Imagine right now if the government would go from 46 cents per person that they spend on art funding, which is what they spend now, somewhere in between, and if they went up to what the arts organizations that are lobbying for us want, and that's $1 per person, just $1 per person in the U.S. on arts. Imagine what new movements could be born of that if that was the case. That's where I think that, Chance the Rapper wanting to do Teachers Awards, that's where things could really change. Or just, if there's a saying called, if you don't like what's being said, then change the conversation. Well, we can change the conversation in the arts if we just do a diversity audit of who's out there leading what should be known as good art, and changing the conversation on who leads it, who makes it, and who gets the general consumption of it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just good to see our artists doing all kinds of great things just here in our local community. I mean, we've talked about on this show before how one of our major artists, and a major artist in the hip-hop world, and a major artist in the his family is a major artist in the entertainment world, is running for mayor. So we've actually talked about this on this show and how it's good to see.
That's right. Pierce Freelon for mayor. Yes.
Whether he wins or not, it's great to see that he's definitely making some inroads and making some great statements about the importance of art, even in some of the things that he's talking about in his campaign. Because I know he definitely has mentioned the need for even some of what he's doing on a political side. I think I even heard what he was even talking about, how, hey, maybe even some of that space that the politicians use could be used as a platform for letting folks have their artistic voices used on occasion. I think he said it. Not to use it all the time, but that is something that he thought that it could be used more productively. And I know we often see that even with public buildings here in Durham, that oftentimes that there are abandoned buildings, abandoned schools, abandoned other things that could be used for arts but are actually either not being used for art or being used for other